Havre Grace Planning Commission, the Havre Grace Planning Commission meeting for January 8th, 2024 will now come to order. And we expect two more to come. So I will recognize them when they come in the room. I'm going to call the roll. Harry Miller.
Here.
Councilwoman Snagus is on the way, I think. Janice Chan.
Here.
Chip Place.
Here.
Farhad Shah.
I'm here.
And Warren Hartenstein is on his way as well. And Chair Volney Ford is present. Now, Ed Garono, our vice chair, is recovering from surgery. So we'll call that an excused absence.
Okay.
And here comes somebody. Here we go. So Councilwoman Snagus is present. And we do have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and start working.
Your name is right there.
First on the agenda is any comments from the general public. Is anybody here that wishes to address the Planning Commission about anything? No? Okay. We'll move to the second item. As is the case every single year, the very first order of business is to elect our chair and vice chair for this upcoming year. And I'm the current chair, and I would accept renomination. I had lunch with our vice chair several days ago, and he very adamantly said he would accept if he were nominated and elected, he would continue as vice chair, and that's Ed Garono. So, do I hear, first of all, let's just go vice chair. Do I hear a motion or nomination?
I'll move to reappoint Mr. Garano as vice chair.
Okay.
I'll second.
Second? Okay. Any discussion from anyone about that? Hearing none. All in favor of Ed Garono serving another year as vice chair, please raise your hand. That's unanimous of those present. And now we move to the chair. Do I hear a nomination for the position of chair for the coming year?
Well, Mr. Ford, I'll move to re-nominate you as chair for the coming year.
Well, that's
I'll second.
right. Any discussion on that motion and second? I'm honored. Thank you. Hearing none, would you, all in favor of that, would you raise your hand? Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to do us well for this coming year. It's always an honor. The next item on the agenda is to review and discuss the 2023 calendar year annual growth report and add any additional comments as necessary prior to sending this out to the Maryland Department of Planning. Who would like to lead that discussion?
Mr. Chair, I got some comments if I can.
Yes, please.
Great. So I spent some time reading this today, and I know we send one every year, and a lot of it's redundant because we want to make sure that the consistency is really good, especially when we're sending stuff down there. I understand that. There's some things I want to go over. I think there's a couple of typographicals and such like that we should probably address that before you're asked to sign it. And then I've got some comments on some other portions, of course, special interest, I guess. And if I can just go through a couple of them. And if I switch a page and you guys see something I missed, please.
You want to go with the The cover letter first?
Actually, I'd like to come back to the cover letter.
You'll come back to that?
Yeah.
Okay. I did the same thing. I went through the cover, since I got to sign the darn thing.
So let me go through the rest of it, and then,
Yes,
then we'll go
okay.
through the cover. So, I think on page 1, it says residential calendar year 2021. I think that's a mistake. It just might be a typo there. Under B, it talks about 5 ordinances, but I only saw 4 attached. Maybe I missed one. I mean, I'm just reading stuff myself, but I only saw 4 ordinances. So if there's a 5th, it's not listed on the worksheet or something, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. It talks about, in C, it talks about 2 annexations, and the 1419 was Chapel Road, not Pulaski Highway, I believe. I was here for that last month. And it says it was adopted 11 of 23, but that's when we recommended it. I'm not sure when it actually gets adopted. Does it get adopted the second we recommend it to the council? I'm not sure. But, and we did that on 12/11/23. So I just wanted to bring that up to you guys. Let me see where else I want to go for next.
Would you go back and just tell me exactly where that is you just spoke to?
Okay, that was, B was only 4 ordinances, and
That's it.
C, C talks about 2 annexations. And if we go to the annual report worksheet, the annexations, it's 1419 was Chapel Road, not Pulaski Highway. And we recommended it on December 12th, but it says it was adopted here in November of 23. So I'm not sure if just some typographical timeline things I can, or maybe it was supposed to say 12/11/23, but I don't think so because it's all date and month.
It was already introduced at city council, but it hasn't been adopted yet. So that was the date it was introduced at city council.
Fair enough. And look, I'm just.
No, these
wanna
are all
get the-
great. These
yeah,
are great, yeah.
So I wasn't like, just want to make sure that if the chair's going to sign this, that it, we want to put our, all right. Hey, so unless anybody else got anything, I wanted to talk about, and this was before Tim and Eric, okay? And everybody knows that I have special interests in my line of work. And one of the things that I told the predecessor here, who I thought did a phenomenal job too, was that, the development capacity analysis not being shared with the school board facility planner, okay? I don't understand why that's a no, and, and so full disclosure, the school district facility planner sits 2 offices away from me, and she will talk to you guys anytime you want. Okay, she's really open to it, and especially with things that are happening with the Shucks Road property. Hartford Academy has slowed down the elementary school redistricting and such like that. So it's really important that, that those things are talked, our growth, to make sure that we have another one of my things I have issues with is adequate public facilities. And everybody knows that. It's not a secret. I talk about it all the time. And, schools are adequate public facilities. And I see us hitting a block here where, it's not going to be, where Havre Grace kids will go to Aberdeen, or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll be in portables or something like that, because the length of time it takes the county to fund and approve additions or whatever. And then, so that goes back to the first page, and I'll make my last comment and turn it over about the first page. The first page of the letter itself, the 4th paragraph down, it says city staff will continue to work with planning staff in Hartford County government to ensure continued consistency with Hartford County growth policy and whatever. And I'm sure that's a pretty canned thing, but I have 2 points to make about that. I don't know how the chairman, or the chair, excuse me, of the planning commission can commit city staff to work with anybody. I mean, we could say that planning commission will definitely work with him because he can speak for himself, but he can't commit you guys to work with anybody. And two, I mean, it says we're working with them, but we're not talking to the school, and they should be talking to the school planner and everything else like that, so we can make sure that as we're in a priority funding area and we have the ability to develop, that we have the adequate public facilities required to continue to support the smart growth that we do have going on here.
So perhaps it should say planning staff will work with city staff. Because that way he could ensure that much.
That was just my personal comment, and I think your comment's good. I'm just saying, it's like, the chair is saying that two entities that we're not in charge of will work together, that's all, and it's like, we can't say that.
Harry, I guess I just want to address the comment about not working with the planner. Whenever we receive a subdivision request, so most recently for the Green property, the Legacies, that it came in, we'd sent that to Missy Valentino at Harford County Schools, and she's provided us a letter saying that there wasn't an issue with capacity. The other item is I looked today on the county website, and the capacity numbers aren't up yet. According to our public facilities ordinance, we report to the mayor and council twice a year on the initial capacity numbers that come out in January, and then the revised that come in July. And we follow our adequate public facilities ordinance, saying that if something's coming up to 110% within the 3-year planning period, that and there's not a district adjacent to that's reaching capacity, then obviously we wouldn't allow that to continue. So as we send things to the county and they provide comments, I mean, there's no way for us to know that there's anything going on with construction or things not being constructed on time unless they tell us. I wouldn't have any reason to just call and say, hey, what's going on with schools today? But I mean, we're doing it as projects come in, we send them, and I have letters in return from them discussing those projects.
Well, so I apologize. I wasn't trying to put anybody in a defensive mode. And as we sit here together and we move forward and approve subdivisions, we are going to hit that wall, whether, we send them the Green property or not. Havre de Grace Elementary School is really close. We're both counting Roy Williams. Aberdeen's building like crazy and counting Roy Williams, and that's an Aberdeen feeder school. And so, it's the building is happening faster than the funding and construction can ever keep up with. So I just cautionary want to, make sure that, that the county knows we're building here, and, pretty soon, if you build it, they will come.
I'll interrupt. For the record, Mr. Hartenstein has arrived, so we have a full house except for the vice chair. Right. Now, anybody else would like to add to the comments of the body of this report?
I have a couple of questions. I don't know if they're typos or if you can just explain them. On page 1, at the bottom, it says total acreage. It says 0 at the bottom of it, and I was wondering, should that be 0 under the city residential development capacity?
Where it says non-PFA?
It says on the residential developed capacity page, this one. And there's a little chart, and then
Could you just, what does the page number say at the bottom?
it doesn't have a page number at the bottom. It just,
Oh, okay.
it's under the residential development capacity. January 2024 is the heading. City of Havre de Grace.
So it's the last page of
Okay.
the last page.
I just don't know if that should be 0, because
because it's included in here.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's not a typo. It's one development, so the entire development is 10.67 acres, which you see above. So we separated the dwellings because they're different types of dwellings, but I guess we didn't have information on the acreage for multifamily and the acreage set aside for townhouses. And it's sort of weird because it's all one development and they share the same roads and parking and all that sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Let me see, I had one more, I think.
Excuse me, would it be clearer if that 0 was just removed and nothing was put there?
Yeah, we can do that.
Because it's, I realize if you try to put a number there, that's going to screw up your column addition. But the 0 sort of throws people off, I think, thinking that there's no acreage. What you're really doing is you've got that line item separated from the rest of the tabulation, and which is appropriate. And I would just suggest that you just strike the 0 and leave a blank.
Okay.
The other thing is on page 6, the planning survey questions, letter B. You have it says, does your jurisdiction have a transportation functional plan in addition to your comprehensive plan? Is that something completely separate?
Yes, I mean, that's going to be something much more in-depth that's looking at each of the roads and the classification of roadways, whether it's a street, avenue, lane, collector, minor collector, major collector, and it goes a lot more in depth. Okay. Yeah, it's not something that we have for a small town.
Yeah, we have the broad view, and they go more in depth in that. Okay.
We do. We have the list of functional classifications of roadways in the transportation chapter, but we just don't have a plan about those specifically.
Okay.
Perhaps that's a question that's really meant for large cities in the state.
Probably.
You know, where they have to separate it out. You'd never be able to put it directly in a comp plan. That's the only thing I could suggest. Yeah. It's a one-size-fits-all form.
I think that's it. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any additions or corrections or questions regarding the body of this report?
I had a few questions, Mr. Chairman. Similar to the school capacity issue under adequate public facilities, I don't really see much mention of sewer and water capacity. And I noticed that I understand that has been an issue for future development of the green property, other properties on Scion Hill. So is there any updated status on that?
Give me 1 second. Let me just look at this for a second.
It's an even year report, so it looks like it's not due until next year to address those new things.
Yeah, that must be the situation because they're speaking about a specific APFO report. I can check to see what we put last year, but I guess to answer your question broadly, the city did have a water model study completed for the entire city to see what the needs would be. I think we have now what the needs are for the different zones, but I think that's still being looked at by the mayor and council to try to figure out how to pay for all those items. So we just aren't at a point yet to where I guess the rubbers had to hit the road where we've had a project come in and then we said, okay, hey, we don't have adequate public facilities yet. So I don't know, and to say that, I don't know that we'll get there because it's possible that we're able to figure out who pays what and then there's not any issues.
Okay.
So it's just, we're sort of in a, like, it's gonna come at some point where we'll have all this information. It'll just be a matter of if somebody beats us to that point with a development application that came in. So we have the legacies that one of the green properties that has applied, but we've sent them information and we haven't received any revisions yet, and they're waiting to see what the water model study says and what their contribution is. So
that remains unresolved.
it's all unresolved. Yep.
Okay. And I noticed also on the planning survey questionnaire, you have marked as no, does the jurisdiction have a bicycle and pedestrian plan, which is near and dear to my heart. And but I know we are working on a study for bicycle routes. Can you give us any updates on that?
Yes, we've selected a contractor. I'm waiting for signatures from administration
Okay.
on the contract. Once we send that in, we'll get notice to proceed. I have a kickoff meeting with the consultant for February 6th, and we'll put a schedule together then, and shortly after, we should be meeting with the Bikeways group and getting that rolling.
Okay, good. Can you tell us who the consultant is?
Meat Hunt.
Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, and then on the, because it's also on the agenda, historic preservation's on the agenda tonight, there was 2 actions adopted in October 2023. Were they both related to the Colored School Museum, or was ordinance 1122 something else? I don't recall.
1122 is something else. There were a couple amendments, I think, to the number of people that would serve on the Historic Preservation Commission. Yeah, there were a couple things like that. And then it was just sort of outdated. I think it said Department of Planning and Economic Development, and that had went away, so we fixed some things. So it was just kind of an update.
Ministerial kind of things. Yeah. And then on the total residential capacity chart, again, the total dwelling units, are those approved subdivision lots for which you have not issued building permits, or can you clarify that a little bit?
Are you speaking about the small chart on page 2?
No, again, it's the one
The last page.
Janice referenced earlier. Residential development capacity, it's the last page.
Yeah, so that's going to be, let me see, that'll be a mix. So individual vacant lots for single-family detached dwellings, so infill lots, that's an estimate. Bully Rock will be a mix of things that have been approved and items that we know that we received conceptual on, so that's going to be a mix.
Okay.
Greenway Farms, all those are recorded. Blenheim Run Apartments, those are all built, but I'm sorry, that's going to be phase 2. Phase 1's already built, so I think that'll be phase 2. So that's close to being recorded.
So that the table is a gross number of building permits and approved and estimated lots.
Yeah, I would say the top is mostly concrete. Let's say, I mean, it could change, but then when you start getting into the Green Farm and Ionello, that's items that we've received conceptually, but it's very early in the process, so those are probably more likely to change.
All right, those are my questions. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add to the mix? Well, you've all done some really good homework here. I think this is the first year since I've been on the commission that this thing has been gone through as thoroughly as it has. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Now, back to the cover letter. I noted a whole number of little grammatical things and typos and stuff like that, mostly grammatical stuff, punctuation and things like that, and sentence structure. I didn't find anything in this letter that was factually incorrect. You know, the letter itself, you know, as the information is presented, is acceptable to me for signing. It's just that I would like for the grammar to be cleaned up. And so what I did is I made a copy and I highlighted and did all that, and I'll hand it to you, and you guys can take it back and do your magic. So we'll consider this a draft letter. How's that? All right? Aaron, did you want to go through it piece by piece, or you want to just let you just see what I did?
Oh, no,
You good? Good with that?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm not sure whether we should advise you that this report is good or whether we should take a vote on the content of the report as amended. Commissioners, how do you feel about that? I think we've conveyed what we'd like to see, and a lot of the stuff was just clarification that you all brought up. So you're okay with them making a few fixes and me signing the letter? Oh, the report?
Right.
Okay.
I'm
we'll do that.
okay.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a discussion of proposed height restrictions in all zoning districts within the Historic Preservation District to 40 feet and with 60 feet in height, only if the Historic Preservation Committee approves that. Before we launch into a discussion, I have a sort of a technical concern about that. For many years, the Planning Commission heard and decided conditional use cases. And the public, if they did not appreciate that decision, they could advance it to the Board of Appeals and let them rule on our conditional use. And we always considered the Planning Commission as having the correct expertise to deal with things like that, whereas in the past we thought of the Appeals Board as being a jury, you know, and hearing all sorts of appeals from all commissions and from all walks of life in the city of Havre. If anybody had a problem with anything going on with the government, they could go to the Board of Appeals. But there was no particular area of expertise on the part of the Appeals Board just for planning and zoning matters, although much of what they heard was that. And then a few years ago, the city changed its procedure, and a conditional use never even gets to the Planning Commission unless it somehow gets remanded back to us. But we have nothing to do with conditional uses. Now, what's being proposed here is in effect a conditional use. It's if they make this change and go to 40 foot is the accepted maximum building height in the Historic District, then anything beyond that, what this proposes is that another commission makes that decision. You know, in effect, the Historic District Commission would serve, would hear the conditional use, and it would be a conditional use. It would be, yes, we'll let you build a taller building, but we want certain conditions to be met, and I could see it becoming fairly arbitrary and perhaps even capricious in some cases. If another commission is able to step in and rule on what is clearly the venue of the Planning Commission and the Board of Appeals. So that's my technical concern. I also know from riding around Havre, I think we all pretty much sense this, that we do have a whole variety of building heights throughout the downtown, just an entire variety of them, and an even greater variety of building styles and eras. And so it's just a giant mixture all through Old Town. That's what we kind of call the Historic District. Actually, the word Old Town probably stretches all the way out to the new high school, you know, in that area. It's just everything but the hill. And and we had some discussions about that at the when we were talking about what to do with the hospital property and what should that become, and what fits Union Avenue, what would look good on Union Avenue. Well, then we realized that Union Avenue itself is a total hodgepodge of architecture from one end to the other. I mean, you name it, and you can find it on Union Avenue, you know, somewhere up and down that road.
It's a library, just out of curiosity. What's the height of the library, just out of curiosity?
Well, I suspect it's, I don't know. I haven't pulled a tape line on it. I don't know. But I know that the hospital is one of the tallest, if not the tallest structures in Old Town, probably only rivaled by some of the old Huber. What's the name of that place now? Ebonic?
Devonic.
Yeah. that complex there is pretty tall. And, of course, we've got the modern condos, down on, down by the marinas, and then we got the office building there at the marina. So yes, we've got some tall stuff. I think that where it sticks out like a sore thumb is if you've got a neighborhood that has almost none of the houses are over 40 feet tall, and then all of a sudden a vacant lot comes available because of a tear down or something, and we need to do an infill. Now we have to see what the builder or the developer wants to put there. And the problem we have there is the economics of trying to build, let's just use a house or a residential structure. The economics of trying to build a house on a very small lot and get enough room in that house to make it livable and to make it economically feasible to build a brand new house. And if we try to build just a little cottage and keep it low, it's just not economically feasible with all the expenses and fees and construction costs that we have to deal with today. So what you've seen is a trend towards taller buildings being built closer together with less side lot. And a lot of times the building has to be tall just to have a place for on-site parking, because there's no room on the lot to park beside the house. So you park under it. You lift the house one story, and underneath is a garage. And there you go with your height. And the height of a structure is measured from the average level of grade at the foundation around the house. And that's what the starting point, and the ending point is the peak of the roof. And when you have a house like that, you don't have the low roofs like you do on 1950s ranch houses. You've got steep roofs, and which gives more height. And that's just pretty much what we're faced with the way our lots are laid out and the way they become available in Havre rates, for the most part. So then we got to decide, if we went to this a structure like this, or an ordinance like this, just what do we base letting somebody go over 40 feet and not letting them go over 40 feet? What do we actually base that on other than just judgment?
Sure. Yeah, let me,
Right.
I guess, just make some clarifications, if that's okay. So currently, 40 feet is the maximum allowed building height in all the districts. As conditional use in R1, R2, RO, and RB, we would allow up to 60 feet.
As a conditional use?
Conditional use, yep. Yard setback requirements are increased by 1 foot for every 2 feet of building height in excess of 40 feet, which would move it further away from the street. I think, I could be wrong, but I think that was probably meant to be that for the extra 20 feet in height, that part would be stepped back, not the entire structure. But that's not how it reads. So what the issue is infill lots in the historic district, and it isn't that they're 40 feet because they're 40 feet now. The problem is the 40 foot. So you'll have a bunch of houses that are 2 stories, and then you'll have an infill lot that will be 3 stories or more and look sort of out of place next to it. So sometimes it looks in place, other times it doesn't. So I don't want to speak for the Historic Preservation Commission. The chairperson, Ms. Johnson, is here, so she can speak to that. But I think the goal was not for them to approve of a conditional use, but that if somebody wanted to restrict it to 2 stories in the historic district where most of the other houses are 2 stories, and in the case somebody wants to go larger than that to 40 feet or 60 feet, that they would come into the Historic Preservation Commission and they would provide a set of recommendations.
But they would not make the decision.
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I guess I guess nothing's been written yet. So, I mean, it's really, part of why we're here today is to consult with you. I said Miss Johnson is here, so she can also speak on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I'm sure she'd be more than willing to answer any questions, but nothing's been written yet. So this was just, people at the Historic Preservation Commission saying, this is really, there's some things getting built out of character in the historic district, and we want to look at that and see like where it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, and be able to help provide guidance on those decisions.
So, but it still comes back to to having to jump through that hoop of another commission weighing in a decisive manner on whether that particular piece of architecture belongs there or doesn't.
I mean, I
And
don't know what else the
we've
Historic
never done that
Preservation.
before, huh?
I mean, I get what you're saying at some point, but I guess I don't know what else the Historic Preservation Commission does if not comment on the things in the historic district. I mean, I don't think it's like, you know what I mean? You'd mentioned earlier that the Planning Commission seems to be the board with the expertise in conditional uses, and that in some ways, decisions by other boards could be arbitrary and capricious. But I would think that if the Historic Preservation Commission commented on anything that wasn't arbitrary, it would be on the appropriateness of certain buildings in the historic
I
district.
agree with you there. I think that that they ought to do more than just comment. They should come in and they should make a strong case to whoever makes the decision. They should make a strong case as to whether or not that particular project should commence, and that I have no problem with, because that's their area of expertise, as to how it would impact the neighborhood and so forth and so on. And I think that either the appeals board or the planning commission or whoever hears this thing needs to pay close attention to what they have to say. That's no doubt in my mind. Yeah, but it's just the question of who makes the decision. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be up to one of the recommendations that you would come up with tonight if you go as far as making a recommendation on how that structure would take place.
Mm-hmm. I think probably what we ought to do, because this can be a kind of a momentous decision on the part of the city. I think what we should do tonight is we should thoroughly discuss this like we're doing right now. And then at our next meeting, we should come up with our recommendations, so we've got time to digest what we've heard. That you all feel good with that?
Yeah, I guess, Tim, I'd be concerned if this were targeted at a single property. And if it were, for example, if we're talking about the replacement of Harvard Memorial Hospital, and they intend to put a rooftop patio there, so now we're going to measure the height of shade producing structures on top of the roof and add it to the overall height of the structure. Gets a little punitive to the investor who's, nominally, theoretically, going to, invest significantly in downtown Havre de Grace. And I wouldn't want to see that investor penalized in advance, anyway.
Yeah, it's my understanding. I wasn't at the Historic Preservation Commission where they discussed this, but in my discussions with Gene and with others, this was about looking at specific infill lots where there's already been construction and kind of going, oh man, this doesn't fit. And then, why is this here and why in other places is it not? And then, what can we do to correct that problem? So as we sort of looked through things, it was like, oh, okay, 40 feet, that's 3, maybe close to 4 floors in an area where you might only have 2 floors. But it wasn't targeted at any future construction. It was more of a reaction to things that have already occurred.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is this particular, are we allowed to talk about specific properties?
You mean like somebody's private home, or no?
Not necessarily the person's, but there's a property down near Concord Point Lighthouse where it's all historic, and then we have new buildings that are like four stories high.
That's fair game.
So is that what we're talking about, that this sticks out like a sore thumb?
I'm not sure if that's one of the ones that caught them, but yeah, it is that
That's
sort
the
of.
idea?
It is that idea that you sort of have, you have kind of one look at home that's, 2 stories or ranchers or those sort of things in town. And then next to it, you sort of have this more coastal looking building that's a bit higher. Each floor has balconies. And it's not necessarily a bad looking building. It just maybe doesn't fit in the fabric of the rest of the neighborhood.
Right, okay.
Now, I would say, as of now, the Historic Preservation Commission, they don't regulate architecture or styles or any of those things. But what we have been working towards is like on where Old Ordinary Building is, and you have the 2 new houses at 347 and 349. Those were required to go to Board of Appeals for a conditional use approval and some variances. And one of the conditions that the Board of Appeals had put on that was that they would come for an advisory opinion from the Historic Preservation Commission. It didn't work out exactly like we hoped that it would for that property, but they did send in some elevations and things, and those did get back to Clark Turner, who's building the houses. I think he did make some concessions there. So I mean, it wasn't perfect, but I think we're at least trying to put in place some sort of process in these type of situations where even if Historic Preservation Commission isn't giving a definitive, like if they're not making an actual decision, they're getting used to this process of coming in and giving advisory opinions and trying to make the historic preservation, the historic district more conform, let's say, without getting into the strict regulations of styles and things that you see in some other places.
Mr. Chairman, I have some comments that reflect what's already been said, but was Ms. Johnson going to make any comments here?
I was going to call on her in a few minutes, yeah. We at the beginning of our meeting, we just invited public comment, but this is dealing with a specific matter before the commission, and I will open it up again if you all have comments. If you just stick with me, just.
Ken, you want to say what you were going to say first?
I'm sorry?
It's Ken, right?
Chip.
I was going to let him finish, and then.
You wanted to say first?
Yeah, we'll call on you.
All right. Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but I'll go ahead and offer comments too. Then, actually, Mr. Chairman, I share a lot of your concerns. Warren, what are you going to say? You were going to raise your hand for?
No, I'm listening, Chip.
Oh, okay.
You always have such,
When he's listening, his fingers come up.
Okay. Sorry.
such insightful comments.
No, I share your concerns, Mr. Chairman, in the overall scheme of how conditional uses are handled in town. And the code itself has some internal contradictions about who has jurisdiction over conditional uses. And it's my personal point of view that conditional uses should be considered as part of the underlying application. We've had 2 examples in recent months, one at the Ianella property where they applied to the Board of Appeals for multifamily use up on Sion Hill, and really without any context. And if you look closely at the development plans, it turns out they were accessing, the main road they were accessing was one of the Phase 1 approved subdivision roads rather than the collector road that the concept plan approved by City Council intended. So that's a perfect example of where you really want, before you approve multifamily housing, you need to understand how they're getting out. And if it's getting out contrary to the concept plan that was approved by City Council, that's a problem. And now they have that approval from the Board of Appeals. Now, I know that has to go back to this body for full review, but I would offer that should all be reviewed together. And then this past week, too, there was, on the Lamson property, there was an application for smaller lots than the zoning approves. And it's a small, in practice, it's a small modification to go from 10,000 to 5,000. In this case, I think the smallest lot was 8,000 square feet. But still, before you approve something like that, you want to look at the whole site plan, see how it fits within the overall context, and not just review it and approve it, that kind of modification arbitrarily. So I agree with you that those kind of decisions should be made in the context of a broader application. Regarding this particular proposal, I think the word that sticks out in the agenda item is approval. And yeah, I would be very wary. I have full respect for the Historic Commission, by the way. And I would go so far as to say that the city should adopt the historic district. So everything in, and I know people would disagree with me on that, but everything in Chapter 97 goes into play. Then the Historic Commission has a full review of everything, any application that occurs in the historic district. And because the City Council has not approved the historic district, I believe that that is inoperative in terms of new buildings. But I would be very reluctant to just, again, kind of cherry pick one particular item like height, control of the height, and then delegate, especially an approval to the Historic Commission, because that's, again, is just one factor in any approval of the building. And, and then I think it'd be taken out of context. And then what would be the criteria for the Historic Commission to approve, something regarding height that would be different than or would it be different from the conditional use application? So because we're in the middle of the rezoning of the hospital site and the comprehensive plan, I'd be further reluctant to just kind of cherry pick, one small item for a whole new level of approvals. Again, with full respect for the Historic Commission and what they do and what their mission is. So that's really my views on the matter.
Yeah, that goes back to the point I made a few minutes ago that we've got to be extraordinarily careful when we go down this road, because we can open a Pandora's box, and we can seriously and grossly affect the future of the city of Havre from an economic standpoint by doing that. And of course, my shining example has always been the poor little town of Port Deposit and what it did to itself. And that, these wonderful old buildings in downtown Port that absolutely deserve preservation. There's no question about that. But it's the way that thing was structured, nobody could afford to preserve. And it just continues to deteriorate, fall to pieces. Go ahead.
Well, there's two things. In economic development, we were asked by the city to look at culturally significant properties in the city, okay? And in that process, we looked at the Maryland Historical Record, and the Historical Society has 2,400, I'm not exactly on the number, but very close to 2,400 initiatives within the Maryland State database. And it's a massive amount of power and delegation. I think the other thing that I would be very cautious about personally is discrimination. What is, when we say this property yes, this property no, the objective reality isn't always it's based sometimes on very aesthetic or subjective tastes and not necessarily on objective fact or objective considerations. And that would always concern me, that we have a building right on the corner of the water down at the marina that I'm sure is over 40 feet high, and It's one of the most historic buildings in Havre, and then we have Havre, which is much newer, but I'm sure is much more than 40 feet high. And anyway, how does one distinguish between those rights and privileges? So that's a concern I have. Purely personal.
So I have a couple of things. I feel strongly that the Historic Preservation Group should be, you can't tie their hands. We can't tie their hands because that's just not appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish with our town. However, that being said, I agree very much with consideration and thinking about how to approach this. For one thing, I didn't see anything in the letter about a Board of Appeals for a decision coming from the Historic Commission, and that would have to be definitely part of it. But my thought process in this whole thing would be that the Historic Society would have their board that would come to us and say, this group is doing this. We think that this is above and beyond what we would like, to the Planning Commission, let the Planning Commission rule on it, and then if they have a problem with that, the builders, they would go to the Board of Appeals. I think it should be just a stepping process where everybody gets a voice and a chance to put forth their policies and their thoughts on that. And that way, that's a 3-step program before a decision is made, and there's a lot of thought put into it. That's my thought process on it. I just don't think we should hand power. I know it sounds crazy because they're not looking for power. They just want decisions to be made in the proper way. But you're right. You cannot just arbitrarily just give somebody something because you don't know, as you were saying, how that will be used in the future. So that's my thought.
Well, it's, the Historic Preservation Commission has, how do I say this? I mean, they certainly have an agenda and an admirable agenda, and that's to preserve as much as possible, and to try to save the gems in Havre Grace and all that. But that is a mission. That is definitely an agenda. Whereas, the Planning Commission and the Appeals Board are supposed to be neutral to those sort of things. We're supposed to not have an agenda when we hear cases. And so there's a big difference there, big difference in, it'd be just like a tree commission wanting to save every tree or plant as many trees as possible. And that is an important agenda, but it's an agenda, okay? So it's kind of hard to be neutral in making judgments when that's your entire goal as a sitting commission to achieve that particular end. And so I go back to the thing I've been harping on for years, that I really honestly think that, and Chip referred to it a moment ago, I think we made a mistake as a city letting conditional uses pass right around the Planning Commission. If it's in the ordinance, and the ordinance says this is a permitted use, and then over here are conditional uses, that means that they also are permitted uses, but with any conditions that need to be set in order to grant that use. All right, and conditions could be almost anything. We could consider the historic preservation as building heights as a conditional use, as it is now, and the conditions that we could impose would be limiting how high that extra few feet is in relation to the houses that are right around it. In other words, not just saying, okay, we're going to grant you the conditional use, so now you can build it right up to 60 feet. We could say, as a condition, we will let you go more than 40 feet, but you cannot exceed 50 feet or 45 feet. And another condition will be an architectural condition that we could impose on it. you know, once you get into conditional uses, you're not limited to what conditions that you can impose on granting that extra. So, and I always felt that that the Planning Commission is better equipped to decide all conditional uses than is the Board of Appeals from a technical standpoint. And then the Board of Appeals is there to override us if we are being unfair or undue to the applicant. And,
Inconsistent with code.
huh?
We're inconsistent with code.
Yeah, and see, we want to make sure that we stay within the comprehensive plan, we stay within all these things. And I just see that these historic preservation considerations are extremely important, and that they need to be woven into those conditional uses. And when something would ordinarily, according to this letter, have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission for a decision, instead, it would come to the Planning Commission for a conditional use decision, and we would hear from the Historic Preservation Commission and the immediate neighbors in that case, and we would build our conditions around what they have convinced us that we should do. And then the builder is, or the developer or the owner or whoever is, leaves this room with what their limitations are, and if they don't like that, then they can appeal to the Board of Appeals. If they don't like that, they can go right to the Harford County Circuit Court and on up to the United States Supreme Court if they want to.
So just listening to the conversation, I just have a suggestion for Tim. Can we, is there, for lack of a better term, can we come up with maybe a roles and responsibilities document? Like, this is what the Historic Commission presents, this is what the Planning Commission does to it, this is what the Board of Appeals, how they react or how they do it. Do we, maybe thinking further ahead, can we have like maybe a future document perhaps that maybe a MOU between the Historic Commission and the Planning Commission, just a thought.
Yeah.
City-
I don't think that's a bad idea, but Chapter 25 has all the duties of each of the boards. And for whatever reason, before I got here, the conditional uses were placed specifically under the Board of Appeals, along with special exceptions, and there's 10 criteria that they're supposed to follow. I'm not sure why that happened, but it would, I could sketch out kind of what this would look like, but it would require not just changes to building heights and that sort of thing at some point, but would require more changes to Chapter 25. And I'm not sure why the mayor and council voted in to make that change just a few years ago, and then, what would be the impetus to get them to take back their vote?
What happened was the city attorney at the time brought this to the attention of the city government, the mayor and council. And the city attorney thought that that a conditional use was the same as an exception and was very similar to a variance. In other words, it was going against what's in the code. And in other words, an exception is being made. And I took the position at the time that conditional use is not an exception. It's already allowed, and the body can just go ahead and say, okay, you can do that, or you can do that and put these conditions on, but it's not an exception. We're not making an exception to the city ordinance. We're not going above and beyond what the ordinance says you can do. Whereas a conditional use says you can do that. You can do that.
With conditions.
With conditions.
Exactly.
And there's a big difference between that and an exception. An exception is very close kin to a variance.
Yeah, and Tim, I think, doesn't Chapter 25, it still gives, under the planning board responsibility, it includes conditional uses and special exceptions as part of its responsibilities too. So I think there's a built-in conflict there.
The Board of Appeals section was changed, but the Planning Commission section wasn't updated. That update is in administration, and it's sitting there because there's other things with Chapter 25 that we're supposed to go through. So currently, it still says the Planning Commission would provide a recommendation on a conditional use or special exception to the Board of Appeals.
All right, so that's not the practice right now, though, even as a recommendation, much
No,
less
and
an
I think
approval.
that was part of also what the city attorney was recommending changing, was that there seems to be a legal issue with this board providing that board a recommendation.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I'm sure the Historic Commission is not the only board we coordinate with, the water and sewage, the tree commission. Eventually, I mean, the Planning Commission has a part to play or has a recommendation to provide.
Maybe, but not to Board of Appeals. They're a little bit different. They're a quasi judicial board, and they have a little bit of different rules. So things that are recommended to them are a bit different than advisory opinions, say like this group would give to the mayor and council. It's a bit problematic, is my understanding legally.
Well, as long as this is going to come up again, maybe we can make our own recommendation regarding, what the planning commission's duties are, including having maybe primary jurisdiction over conditional uses.
What I used to do my first 10 years was we would sit here and we would hear a conditional use case, and we would make a decision on that case. And I can't recall, I don't even think a single time did anybody ever appeal our decision to the Board of Appeals. I think we went unappealed for 10 years. So I have to go back and look at the records, but I don't think a single time did somebody get so aggravated by our decision that they took us to the Board of Appeals. Now, when it came to a variance, we would hear the variance case before the Board of Appeals. We would hear the case, and we would take two votes. The first vote would be to deny the request because it required a variance, and so that was a formality. We denied the request, and then we took a second vote on recommendations to take to the Board of Appeals. And I would write a letter listing our rationale on the whole thing and the rationale for the recommendations. And then I would go to the Board of Appeals meeting every single time, representing the Planning Commission. And I had the letter all nice and typed up, and I would present it right there in the hearing. So nobody got a chance to pour over it ahead of time. It was presented at the same time that the applicant was presenting their case. And in some cases, I'd be standing here, and they and their lawyer would be standing here, and we would be arguing opposite sides of the case. And other times, I would be representing the Planning Commission, and I voted against granting that appeal, but I was outvoted on the commission, so I had to go up and defend the commission's decision. And I wouldn't never say who voted which way. I would just say what the vote count was. That's all. It was, 5-2 or something like that. I would just tell them that. I wouldn't name names. Yeah.
So I see the issue with variances per se, because depending on what it is, I mean, if it's real minor, okay, run it through the Planning Commission. But if they got a real live variance that goes against whatever, they'll want to know if that variance can be approved before they're going to invest the money in doing a site plan. So I can see why, bring it to the Board of Appeals first, maybe on certain things. I can almost understand that, yeah, we'll grant you a variance to put a Walmart right in the middle of Grace Harbor, okay? And then they bring us a site plan later, right? So
It didn't
in
happen
those
that way
cases,
very often, but it did happen.
it doesn't,
Yeah.
but I can see the need sometimes why a variance would need to go before that, because we we can recommend
But
things,
it
but
just never was a problem, and it, we would hear the variance case.
so,
We weren't there to approve
but
the
here's,
site plan.
here's a good case in point. What if somebody wants a variance to the sign code, and it's very important to them, but we already got a site plan? And it's like, yeah, we like your site plan, but they're not gonna grant you the variance, and they go, can't do what we're doing there, because if we can't have that sign, which is some other type of thing they're under, I mean, and again, just to weigh in on this,
Well, most of the variances didn't have to do with an entire site plan. The variance had to do
it's
with,
just one aspect, yeah, but the
An
deal
aspect,
is
and-
some can be a deal killer.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Well, that could be a deal killer if it came back to us and we killed it. Either way, it's a deal killer.
exactly.
so.
And then, just discussing what everybody, because I appreciate all the comments here. Everybody's had just great input about this. I'm really reluctant to change things from, that's been an established permitted use for a long time to a conditional use. But, I can see both sides. Right now, if it is a conditional use, the enforcement is permitting. So once that condition's made, it's like you agree to that condition or you don't get your permit. So again, I wonder sometimes, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but I worry about, what's wrong with 41 feet? 41 feet?
What?
41 feet, 42 feet, 45 feet, penthouse. It's just an equipment room, a screen wall to hide the air handler. Okay, where does it stop? Because and then topography, and then one of the other things that we have heard in the past, for instance, is like maybe there is a historic property, they could always see the water. Now somebody wants to build a house there, 35 feet, and you can't see the water, and it's in Old Town, or I don't know. It's just blocking somebody's view now. I mean, I can just see where, this could be a real Pandora's box. I think that was a good way to put it.
Yeah, does anybody else want to add anything? I'm gonna let these ladies have a say. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. I was listening to everyone's conversations and discussions and recommendations, and I think it's great that we have a wealth of different experience and expertise in our field. I just wanted to add that the Board of Appeals, they do have to go to the same exact training that we do. They're together. Board of Appeals and Planning Commission, the training that we are required to attend, so we have that same base knowledge of information as a foundation. Some of our Planning Commission, we have people with, great expertise in different areas from their livelihood. And I think it's the same with the Board of Appeals. So I just want to add that because I've been to the Board of Appeals meeting, and they do take it seriously. And I think that sometimes when it's just us being in charge of granting conditional uses, sometimes it puts a hold on, progress. Because we can only see so many cases within a month. So I just want us to all be a little bit open-minded about the fact that we're working together for the greater good. And that's why I like what you were saying, Janice, about the comment of working together with the Historical Preservation Commission, having them bring their recommendations, and having us work together as a planning commission to hear their recommendations and, being the team and the body that takes it to the next step. So I think that, I just wanted to share my input on that, and I appreciate all that everyone has to say, and I look forward to hearing from the ladies.
Yeah, and then let me just add one thing. I don't think any of our comments were intended as a knock on the Board of Appeals, that's for sure.
Oh, no, I didn't.
I'm sure you didn't
No, I didn't take it that way. I was just sitting, I'm reflecting, I listen.
Yeah.
And then I'm reflecting on, the experience that I've had as
No,
being only on council 2 years and being on different commissions the last 4 years. I've seen things evolve, and Volney's been on the planning commission for many years. So there's been a great evolution of the commissions working together. And I think that, sometimes it's, we're greater strength in numbers. And that's all I was just trying to say.
yeah, no, that's great. And I think the main point we're trying to make is that certain issues like conditional uses should be considered in the whole context of the application and not in isolation by any board. And I think, and regarding the Historic Commission, it's certainly, and if it hasn't been the practice, it should certainly be the practice that they receive formal notification, at least, of any land use application that's pending in the historic district, so that they have full opportunity to participate before whatever board is considering that application and offer their comments on that.
100%
at minimum.
agree.
And I agree, and I also think that the neighbors in the surrounding area should also be notified so that they have, their voice can be heard as well, the homeowners.
All right.
Okay, anybody else? So, would one or both of you like to address the commission?
Do you mind if I stay?
Yeah, got to get to the microphone.
I'm walking around historic Havre Grace all day, looking at stuff.
Now,
Not for this purpose, for something else.
for the record, we need your name
Yes.
and address.
Yes, Jean Johnson, 666 Chesapeake Drive. So I'm here as chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and Tim did a good job of summarizing some of the things we're up to with this letter, but I really want to put this in the context of design guidelines for historic preservation in Havre de Grace. The county released in 2022 a really nice document, which I reference in the letter. And so it's sort of a broader goal to introduce the idea of thinking, carefully and with purpose about new construction design. We've done a lot to promote the preservation of existing historic buildings in Havre de Grace. We need to do more, of course, but this is really the focus of it. So we're kind of trying to soften up the thinking or sharpen the thinking about new construction design. The other thing I want to point out, did all you have a copy of this letter? Yeah. Okay.
I somehow did not.
We're asking for consideration of height recommendations for single-family residents within the NRHD, which is a fairly defined, it's a defined area. Does everyone know basically the outline? Okay. We do not have a local ordinance, as Chip pointed out, but the City Council in 2018 did endorse the borders of the National Register Historic District, which was established in 1982. Really what we want is consideration of height recommendations. And the reason we focused on height was it's pretty unambiguous. It's not, I don't like the fact that you chose a Federalist style versus, Queen Anne. Height is height. But also, we were prompted by a couple of houses that we thought looked, frankly, out of place. Someone used the term sore thumb. They just look odd. We know that in the critical area, of course, houses have to be raised. So we're practical. We're not purists. We just want to get the idea of design considerations, having streetscapes that don't look so higgledy-piggledy. We have a wonderful, diverse collection of architectural styles in Havre de Grace, and we'll continue to have that. But we want to just have a little bit of thoughtfulness introduced into new construction design. And as Tim pointed out, we did have a little bit of an opportunity to speak with two developers who are doing the two properties just west of the old Ordinary on Congress Avenue. So that was a baby step. I'm joined today by Jeanette Pavlak, who is the beautiful owner of the John O'Neill House on Washington Street. And fortunately, in Havre de Grace, we don't just have Historic Preservation Commission and a city government, which has frankly been fully supportive of preservation, largely through hiring Tim and Eric, but also through many other people's efforts. But we also have a lot of private homeowners who are very serious about preserving the history that their properties, do a good job of showing every day when you walk by who they are. So that's really where we are. We're not interested in, something that's legal in the sense of the process of going from A to B. We just want to be considered. We want to be notified. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Chip. We are now. That process through Tim's office is going much better, because often we had no idea there was a new project underway in the National Register Historic District. Do you want to add something, Jeanette? Okay. I'll be happy to answer questions or
Could you
talk
define
in another way.
hickly-pickly?
I'm sorry?
Could you define hickly-pickly?
Piggly. Sorry about that. The housing diversity, frankly, in any numbers of ways is a good thing. You can walk down Union Avenue and you can see sort of the vernacular Havre de Grace house with the sweet porch and the little pointy roof. And then you can have grand houses like Spencer Silver or our beautiful Methodist Church or others that are a demonstration of wealth and power. And then there's the houses that the regular folks lived in. We want to preserve all those. Yeah, we do. But that's kind of where we are. We just want to get into the flow of consideration.
Thank you so much.
Other than the
Any questions?
higgly-pickly question, which I'll forgive you for, any other questions or comments? I don't know whether, Tim, is the thing about the CLG come out?
It's public knowledge.
Yeah.
I haven't announced anything besides to you guys, but you're more than welcome to speak on it if you want to say something about it.
I'll take some. Tim and his colleague Eric and all the planning people have done some wonderful work of getting us designated by the MHT, by the Maryland Historical Trust, as a certified local government. And that's a very important development, and I thank him profusely publicly for his efforts. We need to show our creds to agencies like the MHT. They can help us, they can give us money, they can do lots of things on the state level. So very glad we got that.
Thank you.
That's it? Oh, Tammy.
One more.
Before you go, I just want to thank you for the opportunity for homeowners to be able to get beautification awards. They're not necessarily able to, upgrade their house to a point where the restoration and they get the historical marker, but they can get the beautification award. That means a lot to the homeowners, and it definitely makes a big impression on the look of our city. So
Thank you for mentioning that. We started doing that about 4 years ago, long before I moved back to my hometown, Havre de Grace. I know the Historic Preservation Commission started giving awards in 2002, so we've given about 75 awards for the historic significance of the property. But we also give these beautification awards, which are very nice, and they often involve just, lovely maintenance of the property, gardens, it's been really nice. And people are thrilled, so good for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming too, and I think we all, definitely appreciate your work. One thing I've said in the past too is that it's very hard to legislate good design, but that's why it's important for people, individuals, and commissions like yours to have an opportunity to participate and comment and critique, and nobody should be afraid of a good critique in terms of design, and you all should definitely be part of the process that way.
Yeah, I was up at Rittenhouse Square a couple months ago, and there's all these wonderful historic Federalist townhouses, and then right in the middle there was this very modernist, couldn't have been more contemporary style townhouse, was the same mass and scale, it was the same materials, and it just flowed with
Yeah.
more historic properties. So
Right.
it can be done.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
And the form-based zoning that Tim and Eric are pursuing with the hospital, I think is zoning's a very hard way to legislate, but form-based zoning is one way to get going in that regard.
Okay, is there any other business for the good of the commission before we adjourn for workshop? Anybody? Hearing none, do I hear a motion? We adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Now, we are going to devolve into workshop mode here, and I guess since Diane's not here, you're the leader, Tim?
Yeah, I was, I think I volunteered for the housing section anyway, before her not being here, so this one's sort of on me. We have two sections left really to present to all of you. One is housing, the other one's economic development. We're hoping to have both of those this evening, but as you mentioned, Diane's out with an illness, so we weren't able to sort of polish that one up before we met with you. However, we were going to rehear Wawa in 10 days at the third Thursday. They had some pretty significant traffic issues that they have to correct based on comments from SHA, the county, and this group. So they've asked to be tentatively placed on the April Planning Commission agenda. So,
You say the Wawa is going to be postponed.
yeah, they've asked for a postponement until April. They said if they get things earlier, maybe March, but they've asked to come in April. So in 10 days or whatever it is, I think we'll actually be able to, again, focus just on comprehensive plan items. So hopefully we can wrap this up, and then in February, get this sent off for 60-day
That
review.
would be wonderful, because come about 8 o'clock, we start to get a little,
Yep,
you know,
I hear you.
and that'll give us a chance to dive into it fresh.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have 10 days to think about this, and hopefully by the end of the week, this week, I'll have some sort of draft to give you of the actual document. It's not going to say much more than the elements, not much more than what I'm going to tell you now. The thing about housing is that there's a lot of little rules that go with the data that need to be looked at, and so I'll explain all of those now, but we can kind of let those set in, and then maybe in 10 days when we come back, we can talk about some specific recommendations and how to make some of the things happen.
Very good.
So I will get started. So it's called the housing element. It's really affordable housing or workforce housing element. They're really looking at how do we should assess, and then we should assess our low income and workforce housing stock. Oop, 1 second. Thank you. No, he was making it full screen. Thank you, Eric. So, yeah, so we're looking at low income and workforce housing, and I'll define what that is in a minute. It also looks at a broader range of issues, including fair housing. Lucky for us, Maryland Department of Planning has put together models and guidelines on their website. They have, I think, a section called Common Practices that goes through a 5-step process of all the things that we should look at in the element, and I'll touch on all those. And they also provide a toolbox of, it has a data dashboard that allows you to look at different geographies and how we fit in and data in those geographies and how that all relates to housing. Eric's also done a good job of taking a lot of the things that they had asked for in the housing element and making it our own data section for that. That will be under Appendix 2 in the comprehensive plan. We should have that for you along with the housing element next week. So there's 4 sections. Housing planning. In there's 3 self-assessments. So the Maryland Department of Planning has given us 15 to 20 questions under visioning, analysis and policy, implementation and regulations. We went through those from staff some time ago and answered all the questions and gathered information on those. They want us to look at housing data, what best practices are, and affordable housing resources. So what is affordable housing? So when we look at affordable housing, it's relative to how much we're making. So what's affordable for us is when you're at the gross cost, your gross monthly cost for housing are 30% or less than your monthly household income. So if you're burdened, you pay more than 30. If you're not burdened, you pay less than 30. But then they further define it as workforce housing is when your household income is within 60 to 120% of the area median income for home ownership, or between 50 and 100% of area median income for rental units. So there's a range. So what we're looking at is trying to keep that sort of vulnerable population of 60 to 120 of household income for ownership, 50 to 100 for rentals, trying to keep their burden less than 30%. That's what an affordable house is, or what workforce housing is. So that's what I was saying. There's a bunch of rules here and a bunch of little things that you have to go through and try to understand. So what we got, this is something interesting I can provide all you by email. It's kind of hard to see here. But this places like kind of a human element on what I just said. So along the top, you have different income levels that are at, I think it says, yeah, so there's 30, which is really, really low, very low income, and then 50, 70, 90, and 110. And then going down, you have different size households, so from 1 to 4, and that tells you what the area median income household is at that percentage. And then along the top, you see different types of employment. So if you're a fast food cook, you make $28,000 a year. So you're somewhere probably at like 35% of the area median income. So so I mean, you're only, it kind of gives you like this human element of different jobs in sort of like this blue collar jobs, middle class jobs, and sort of what you're able to afford in those different areas, if that makes sense. So the housing data is a little difficult. We're a small city, and the census and different entities don't look too much at Havre de Grace for wider data. They'll look at population, they'll look at stuff that we send to them on building permits and the number of houses we have. But when you start looking at some of these larger statistics on housing and household income and that sort of thing, they give what are called metropolitan statistical areas. So depending on how you look at it, we could be in the Philadelphia, Camden, Wilmington metropolitan statistical area, or the Columbia, Baltimore MSA, or we can be looked at from the county level because there's a lot of data for Harford County. They're all sort of similar, but they don't say a whole lot necessarily about us. And it's, even though we're here and we're small, it's hard for us to have accurate data on household income in the city. So what we basically say is what makes the most sense out of these different cohorts, these different metropolitan statistical areas or the county, and what makes the most sense for us when we look at this section. What data should we use? So for this section, I looked at the county. So, I mean, there's different things going on within the county, things in Bel Air, things in Aberdeen, but that's probably the set of data that's most close to home. And even though it's not exact, we can say the trends and things that are occurring in the county are probably similar to the trends that are occurring here, even if that exact number is not the same. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to go over some of this data, and hopefully that makes sense. So just one example. So if we did the Philadelphia, Camden, Wilmington metropolitan statistical area, the area median income for a 4-person household was $114,000. When you look at the county, it shifts to $121,700. It's $7,000 different a year. That one is probably more, the county's probably more correct than if you're counting in Camden and Philadelphia, because they're such large cities and they have a lot larger range of incomes in those areas. So the county, I mean, the average for the county is a little bit higher than the MSA. Probably works better for here. It's not going to be exact, but it's the best we can do. With that in mind, when we look at affordability monthly for home ownership, gross cost could be somewhere between $1,659 at the 60% level to 3318 at the 120% level. And then for rentals, that's 50 to 100, so 1,382 at the 50% level and 2765 at the 100% level. So those are the target amounts that we're trying to have, that we're examining in this chapter for where we're trying to produce housing. Like this is where they want us to look, are in those monthly cost ranges of what people can afford, if that makes sense. So it's just a graph that shows selected monthly owner cost with mortgages. You can see it's sort of a bell curve. There's not many people at the top of the list. On the low end, there's not a lot of housing where people are paying $500 or less a month. And there is more upper end housing, so it does skew a little bit towards the higher end. But you can see in that middle, the three middle bars, we have a good chunk of housing in that middle area. Now, if you compare that to this rental cost, you can see there's really nothing on the high end at all. A little bit more on the low end, but there's no high end rental housing. So the first thing that catches me here, and this is maybe just because I study this a little bit more, and I'll go into this, but there's a whole movement going on called missing middle housing, and it's saying that that we're not producing enough of this kind of middle housing. And what happens, and we'll discuss this further, but what happens is you have people with higher incomes in the area, but there's no higher income housing. And then there's not a lot of low income housing either. So you have a lot of people at the low end fighting for this kind of middle housing that are overextending, burdening themselves. You also have people on the higher end who are eating up middle housing, taking it away from people who would need it, which causes people to usually overextend. People usually don't go backwards in rental housing. They usually go up. So there's sort of this continuous fight over a scarce resource in rental housing. So as you see in this next slide, on the left, you have the home ownership burden. So 78.5% of people who own homes in the city, or 21.5% are burdened. So 78.5% are not burdened. 21.5% still isn't great. Some people are living housing poor. They're paying a bit too much. Usually with home ownership and higher credit rates and availability for credit, these are there will be some workforce families in there, but you don't have a lot of like very low or low income home ownership. So that burden is sort of a middle class burden. When you look at the rental burden, more than half of people who rent homes in the city are extending over that 30% rate. And that's for people, like I said, again, in that 50 to 100% price range. And the reason probably for that is that we just don't have enough rental housing across the board, high end, middle, and we've done better with low income, but we're always missing that. So more than half the people who rent in the city pay more than 30% of their monthly costs. So again, likely causes of the housing burden, a lack of middle housing, causing workforce housing families to overreach into more expensive housing, overall lack of rental housing. We just lack supply. We just don't have enough. So this chart here, in the blue, what you have starting from 1990 to 2022 are the overall number of housing units in the city. So you can see there's been steady growth. That orange one is the number of rental units in the city over time. So we've actually had a loss of 106 rental units over the past 30 years. So while it's been a goal of the city, at one time we had more rental units than home ownership units in the city. And we were really trying to get the policies put in place, and there was really a push to give that more of a balance where there was more home ownership versus rental. But what's actually happened is we've lost overall rental units, net rental units. So it's not just that the percentage has changed the way that we've wanted it to, but it's become unbalanced. So these are just some common practices that they put in place. These are just things to consider over the next 10 days. So we can talk about now, but we can also talk about next week, things to do to help create workforce housing. So one is this idea of inclusionary zoning. It's a hard one to sell, but this is maybe the biggest tool, basically what you say is something along the lines of, for all subdivisions, 10 units or larger, you have to set aside X percentage for 20 years or 30 years for people within a certain income range. So you just force people to do it. You can also have like a bonus scheme or like a voluntary inclusionary zoning where you say, you're only allowed to build, I'm just making things up here, so don't quote me. You're allowed to build 10 units per acre, but we'll give you 15 units per acre if you take 2 units per acre and set those aside for affordable housing. So there's some ideas that you come up with. Sometimes if it's not done correctly, nobody will take the bonus because it's not worth it for them. Other times, if you force people to do it, there's political backlash. So that one's kind of a hard sell, but it's potentially the tool that works the best. There's different financial incentives, so we can encourage the use of Section 8 vouchers here, which we already have a lot of communities and landlords that accept Section 8 vouchers. We also have a tax abatement scheme we use in town. If you're in the area around the hospital and you have a house that was commercial at some point, residential at some point, then became a commercial use, probably something related to the hospital. If you switch that back to a residential conversion, there are tax breaks the city gives you for that. And also, if you're a veteran and you move to the community, there's tax abatement that the city provides. So we do provide financial incentives currently in some situations, but there's the opportunity for more. We could continue to have these private-public partnerships with developers and nonprofits. We have the Ivy Hills townhome development and Blenheim Run. So the Blenheim Run development, the zoning that was put in place for that commercial mixed use is actually listed as a best practice on the Maryland Department of Planning website. So that's something that they're telling communities, hey, take a look at this. This is the way to build affordable housing, is to have it near transit and near retail, near services, that sort of thing. So yeah. I mean, our zoning code that was made for this development is on their best practices list. Yep. So when you go and you look at what kind of, what are some good ideas I can do to make more affordable housing in my community? It says Havre to Grace Commercial Mixed Use Zoning District. We also work with Habitat for Humanity. We've provided some incentives for Habitat for Humanity, tax abatement while they're in the process of building homes until they're able to sell those to people they have on their list. So the city does have a history with that, but there's obviously more things that we could continue to do. Allowing accessory dwelling units is another. We call them cottage dwellings, and recently had changed that to accessory dwelling units. Those are allowed in the city. And the Maryland Department of Planning is currently in a task force about accessory dwelling units to try to see what barriers and things are in the way that are stopping people from building accessory dwelling units. Like a garage apartment, in-law suite. Yeah, they're called a number of things. There's a ton of different ones, but it's basically another house that's accessory to another dwelling unit that's accessory to the main dwelling unit. Yeah, we allow it. So what's good about this task force is there were certain people that the Senate had assigned to it, but they also reached out to planning directors that had recently just passed laws. So I was on a panel with some other people in the state, but with Phyllis Grover from Aberdeen. She was there as well. So we were able to give our viewpoint. But then we also set them up with local residents who recently had accessory dwelling units approved and constructed. So now they've given their feedback of what their thoughts are on the process and how much it costs and that sort of thing. One of the issues in the city with accessory dwelling units, and some of this was spoken about earlier with the historic discussion from Volney, is the economics of it. Like, is it worth building a garage apartment when you have to pay $18,500 for a water and sewer hookup and all the other impact fees? So that's another financial incentive and things to discuss are things the city can do to encourage more dense housing, because as of now, a 500 square foot garage apartment would pay the same as a 3,000 square foot home to be constructed as far as impact fees go. They're both $18,500. So those are just some things to look at. Maybe there's no way around it, but these are just issues to discuss as we go forward. And increasing density. So we're looking at the RO district now because of the hospital leaving. But just as we eventually go into the comprehensive rezoning process and implementing the comprehensive plan, where does it make sense to have more density to allow smaller lots or to allow townhouses in more places, or maybe have some in-between definitions of, now we have kind of like duplex townhouse, and then multifamily. Maybe there's something in between that's more appropriate somewhere. So again, just all food for thought. Over the next 10 days, we can get back to some of this stuff. Again, we should consider where in the comprehensive plan to be appropriate. We have special designation on Route 40. We're looking at increased density around the hospital. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be high rises. There can be in between. And it can be constructed in a way to maintain and strengthen the character of the community. So this is just a little chart from one of the main agencies that I think these are the people that came up with this idea of missing middle housing. So it shows you on the left, you kind of have single family homes, and then all the way on the right, you have these mid-rises, and you have a lot of really cool options in between. You have cottage courts and townhomes and a lot of things. And so, here in Havre de Grace, we have duplexes, we have townhomes, and then we kind of go to multifamily, but there's a lot of really cool options in between that we could potentially consider that would increase the density and provide some additional character to the community. So that middle area is sort of what all communities are missing. I mean, this is a nationwide phenomenon that's been discussed, that there's not enough of this middle housing, and people are overextending and becoming house poor because there's not enough supply in this middle area. Location appropriate. So yeah, one of the great things about the commercial mixed use is that we look to put affordable housing near transit. So to make your burden less, it isn't just necessarily about your gross house payments, but if you're near transit, then maybe you don't have to pay for a car payment, or you don't have to have as much gas per week, or if you're near carpool options, or if you have employment areas near where you work, then you can walk to work, or you can take your bike to work. So there's ways to place increased density or housing like we have at Blenheim Run, where it's near employment areas and where it's near transit options. So here are just some future strategies to consider. Requiring larger developments set aside a percentage of housing. So that's that inclusionary zoning item I had mentioned. Continuing partnering with nonprofit organizations and developers to create low and very low income housing. Similar to what we do with Habitat for Humanity and Blenheim Run now. Increase densities where location appropriate. Examine more opportunities for local incentives. Decrease parking requirements, impact fees, and other burdens that limit workforce housing development. Establish a land bank for getting vacant houses back on the market. So there is state law. I haven't looked into it much, but there are some properties in town that go to tax sale and they don't sell. And then at the county level, the reason they don't sell is because at the county level, there's a bunch of property taxes that are usually on those. And we have to ask the county to waive those, and that's not something that I think that we've really pursued. The state has a better option where we can kind of get in and I don't know if this is, in Michigan it's called a tax foreclosure, but basically the local municipality can foreclose on something where taxes are owed. I'm not exactly sure of the system, but there are more creative ways available if something doesn't go to tax sale that you can sort of get things off market. And tax sale isn't necessarily clean anyway, even though if you win the auction, there's still a period of time that the other person can come back and get it. So it can be a little discouraging to go that route to get a property. And the city has some properties that it's using and not using, and maybe considering surplusing those properties or providing them to places like Habitat for Humanity, which we've recently done, so they can build more workforce housing. That's it. I'm open for any questions you have. And again, this was just kind of food for thought. Stuff to bat around over the next 10 days, and we can we can talk about it then also.
I don't know if you have this statistic in your head sitting here, but what right now is the ratio of rental dwelling units to owner occupied?
It's like 70-30.
Right at 70-30.
Yeah, I think maybe 71-29 or something like that. Yeah.
You know, I think that's a perfect balance. You think it's not enough rentals?
Well, I think the 70-30 ratio may be okay. I think the issue is the net loss in overall rentals. I think you can have you can continue to have a 70-30 balance.
In the late 1980s, we learned that Havre Grace had the highest rental occupied housing of any community in Harford County. We were sitting at
55-45.
Huh?
55-45 the other way.
It was a little more than 45. It was like 47, 48.
No, it was 55% rental.
Huh?
55% rental. It was upside down. We had 55% rental, 45% owner.
At the time we did the comp plan, it may have been 49 at that time.
Okay.
But right then, it was just that census that we were operating off of, and we said we need to do something about that. And so all kinds of policies fell into place that changed that, and we got it down to 30%. And apparently it's been pretty much holding steady ever since around that, has it not?
I mean, the 70-30 is pretty new. I mean, it was, I think it was 65-35, and then in 2010, probably like 60-40. So I mean, it's continued to decrease, but that's why I guess that's what I'm getting at is it's not the ratio, it's the net decrease in rental, like the city's grown, but we've lost 106 rental units over the past 30 years.
Of course, I suspect also that no matter what we try to do, that there's a lot of rentals that aren't reported. You know, you're not going to see too many owner-occupieds that aren't reportable.
Yeah.
But there can easily be rentals that are kind of done under the table that we just don't know about. So we can always figure the rentals are going to be higher than what's.
Basement apartments.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, these are just census statistics. They're using estimates based on whatever they base these things on. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think you can have I think you can find a ratio, you can keep a balance, but then I think as growth occurs, it's best that it grows sort of uniform.
Yeah, I would rather see home ownership at all economic levels. You know, I think that's really should be the goal we strive for.
Yeah, we sort of have it here, you know. I mean there is some burden as you see, but this is the selected monthly owner cost. What this doesn't tell us is what households are in what category. This just tells us, sort of a random sampling of how much people are paying. So you do have a bit of people paying more on the high end, but you do have a lot of higher end housing in Bully Rock, and those areas. But I mean, if you look at this, there's a pretty good size middle area, and then on this page it shows that we have a housing burden 21%. I haven't found anything yet that says what a standard of a healthy burden is. I'm not sure if that exists, but that there's that you obviously you strive to have nobody burdened, but I mean this shows that I think you have from a home ownership level, you probably have a pretty evenly distributed amount of houses based on income. When you look at the rental, more than half the people are burdened, and then you see here that there's there's still a lot of stuff in the middle, but there's no high end housing. There's very little low and very low income housing. So you kind of have everybody fighting for the middle. You have this high rental burden, and then a net loss of 106 units. There does seem to be some problem there. No, I don't know. The city can't say really like you have to rent these units. You have to rent your property. We can't do that. So really, the way to encourage this would be like we did at Blenheim Run. Allow apartments, allow multifamily in areas where it makes sense, where rental is maybe more likely in that type of unit than in others.
So Tim, this is just my comment and my observation. You can take it or leave it. But the whole concept you mentioned about housing or mid-level housing, if that's the right word I'm using,
Missing middle.
missing middle housing. And again, I'm biased because I live in Bully Rock. I don't see that anywhere. You know, everything there starts with the base price is $500,000 and above.
Right.
So are builders told to accommodate this, or are we just left at what they do or how they price it out? Because
I think it's just the market right now. I mean, we had someone come to us recently who had a townhouse concept that would have been for a little bit less, and they said they're considering switching it to a larger single-family concept because that high-end housing is what's selling right now. People are paying in cash for it. The economy's a little weird with that because people in the middle ranges, you become more burdened now because of the higher interest rates. So if you're on the home ownership end, you know, the stuff that's really kind of moving right now is the higher end stuff. People have money they're paying in cash, or they have bigger down payments, so they're not as burdened. But I mean, I think you see, you know, at Greenway Farms, you have some townhouse development that's going on there. Those are really, really moving. So you can see that there's a need for it. And my understanding at Greenway Farms is they're doing their own financing. So they're buying down the interest rates, however they're doing it. So they're getting, you know, people in it like a much more attractive rate. You know, it's D.R. Horton, they're a big builder. So I'm not sure, you know, who all's doing that. You got to be a pretty big home builder to pull that off. But, you know, when you're able to have a little bit more of an attractive interest rate like that, I mean, those things are moving. We just handed out 24 permits the other day. And if you go out there where they're doing phase 2 now, I mean, there's people out there walking their dogs, and they're on one street, and like half a block over, you know, they're full on construction out there, really, really moving.
because, you know, this is something else. I mean, I read in the news that, you know, millennials have ruled out owning a house, you know, because of all this hype, you know.
Right. And I mean, it's, you know, we have a different demographic here, I think, where there's probably not a ton of millennials, but I mean, in that theory, if you're going to stay with renting, you know, it makes this situation a lot worse. You have a lot more people, you know, fighting over that same scarce supply of housing of rental housing in the middle. I said, and it's rental housing across the board. There's nothing on the high end. I think I mean, I don't know. Developers would know better than I would, obviously, but it looks like there would probably be a real market for higher end, you know, rental housing. And I think that would end up freeing up a lot of the burden. I think you'd see kind of a shift of everybody sort of falling into their income range.
I don't know if you're going to get that because a lot of people in the higher incomes are using their properties as retirement funds, and, you know, so it's more of an investment than a need to
Right.
make money. So I'm not sure how positive that would be.
A little more than a year ago, we had just, I don't know, you know, south, east, northwest is a little confusing here because 95 really runs east-west, but just south of, on Route 40, south of Gashies Creek, it was a townhouse development that we looked at, and it was quite a few units and basically all designed to be all rental. And it was 3 rows of buildings, and there's 1 row, and that's it. It seemed like it was very attractive from the point of view of.
Is that the Blenheim Run development? Yeah. Yeah, they're moving forward. They have another 60 units that are planned, and a commercial aspect to that. Yeah. I think they were just waiting to get people in for phase 1. They got some federal funding for that, and then there's a period of time before you can seek additional federal funding, I think 2 years. So I think they're trying to recoup a little bit cost, waiting for that deadline to go, and then getting those, I think there were home funds, and then they would start on that next part.
I don't remember that when it came through here being a phased project. They they could stop at any time, blame the economy or whatever, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose. Did we ever find out what businesses they were putting in over there? Have they done the retail yet,
Nope.
space?
Not been done yet. Yeah.
And that was one of the big deals about it was, you know, like, what are they gonna put in there? A vape shop and a liquor store? I mean, they probably shouldn't have got occupancy in, you know, phase one until phase two was started or something, you know? My opinion.
I kind of like the idea of what you said with putting it where there's affordable transportation and ways of getting around. I like the Highway 40 idea of putting townhomes in there because it's accessible to the highway, the buses, close to get to the train station if you want to work in Baltimore. There's a lot of positive stuff right there for buildings that are larger, that we're talking about maybe not putting in a historic section. But I like that idea. I didn't even consider that as far as what to do with the Route 40 area in there. But when you're saying that about what happened with Blenheim, they're saying that this is a positive thing. Can you just name one or two of the reasons they feel like this is very positive?
When you say they, who do you mean?
Whoever put us in the magazine of being one of the projects.
Oh yeah. Maryland Department of Planning has a model and guidelines that they put out for this, just to give local governments a better idea of what they're looking for when we put together for the comprehensive plan. And they have a section of recommended ways to goals and objectives to handle housing issues, affordable housing issues. So this is one of the things that is in that section, is this commercial mixed use that we have. But it was because it allowed for multifamily, near transit, and in a mixed use environment. So there'd be some sort of strip commercial where people would have services nearby, or jobs.
Okay.
Or jobs. So yeah, those are the big three things. So I guess it's like, you think about it, supply and demand. So like, you know, if you have a higher supply in housing, it drops. If you drop demand, then maybe housing prices drop. It's sort of the same idea that if you can increase people's wages, or you can get them to a place where their costs are less.
Right.
Hi.
Hi there, Tim. When calculating the income level and the 30%, do you use net or gross pay?
It's gross.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Tim, I really appreciate you describing what affordable housing means, because affordable housing has such a stigma attached to it. And it's basically what regular people can afford. It's that simple.
Yeah, I thought it's too bad you can't see it. I can get this to you, but I mean, this for me was really telling and really puts a human element on, you know, if you're a school teacher or a social worker,
Yep.
you know, how much you can afford at different wages, or where that occupation lies at in that percentage. So this was sort of meaningful to me from, I said, just a human element more, although it has numbers and percentages. It was just more from you and a human element of what families with different occupations can afford. And I mean, these are, you know, the lifeblood of our society. These are like those real, like, you know, important occupations. So
Real people, not the executives.
right.
So when I lived in Virginia Beach, Portsmouth had a desperate need for teachers because it was a terrible, terrible area to live in. It was a very high crime area. And what they did to attract teachers to live in the area was to give them very low mortgages. The city would subsidize the teachers if they would live in the area where they were teaching at. And I think they eventually did that for firefighters, but I can't say that for sure, but I'm pretty sure that they did, in order to get people more invested into their community. And I kind of feel like that, I don't know how Havre de Grace itself can do it, maybe Harford County can in that way, maybe, but I feel like if there's some sort of incentive to do that, because teachers don't make that much money, they can't afford, you know, eventually they make money, but they don't make money for a long time. And firefighters, I know they don't make much money. So, I mean, by the time that they're paying their mortgages, their spouse has to work, and probably maybe somebody's working 2 jobs. And I just feel like if you're looking at that middle range, I think you're really looking at a 2-income household, possibly 3 incomes, because a second job for somebody. And I feel like that we as a community should try to help out somehow in there. I just don't know. I just don't know how. I'm just putting it out there that there's ideas out there floating around in order to help people in that middle range find a house. So, I don't know. Do you have any ideas on how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done a good job in the city with these public-private partnerships, especially with Habitat for Humanity. I mean, the city's surplus property near Battery Village that they weren't using, and something I think over on
What about Battery
Ohio
Village?
Street.
Could you explain about Battery Village? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Yeah, if you're going up Revolution, there's that set of
I know
older
where it is.
townhouses. Yeah, so there was some property the city owned there, and they had surplused it or donated or something to, I'm not exactly sure the details, to Habitat for Humanity, and then they build houses for workforce housing in those areas.
Okay.
And then they've also done tax abatement, so while they're building the property, they don't have to pay property tax. So they've done a lot of things to work with Habitat to get those houses built here in the city.
Okay.
So I mean, there is some of that stuff, but it's limited and you have to be creative.
You did say that there was veteran benefits and other things when you had started, so I know there's things out there. I just feel, for the people that are keeping us safe,
Right.
it's very hard to live in the community. I think a lot of people live outside of the community. I mean, I know several people that live in Port Deposit and over in Perryville, because it's a little cheaper to live there. But just a thought.
Thank you.
Tim, you didn't really mention much about the under 60% of medium income and how we stack up in serving that cohort.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very low income area. So those are usually served by people on Section 8 vouchers. So the Section 8 voucher program, you basically, the federal government pays some amount of money based on housing cost in the area towards your rent. So we have Ivy Hills, which I think is mostly a Section 8 community. A lot of the private landlords in the city accept Section 8 vouchers. So there's not a lot really local municipalities can do about that very low range. It requires much more. It requires much more assistance to help people in those very low income categories. So really, it's having things like Blenheim Run that also accepts Section 8, Ivy Hills, and just when those sort of developments come along, to make sure that we're encouraging them in the right locations where there's transit and services.
Well, have you quantified that need and
I haven't because I guess because there's not a lot of locality can do about it, it's not really something that's addressed in the models and guidelines. So that's why they kind of have us in those ranges, that like 50 to 100 or 60 to 120 range, because below that there's not a lot of local policy that can occur to encourage housing for that group of people. And that very low income cohort can also be spread across many different municipalities. So you sort of take it where you can get it, sort of thing. So, okay. But I mean, to answer your question, I haven't quantified that.
Okay.
An investor in that kind of property, these two projects on Beards Hill have become, super occupied very, very quickly. And it's relatively affordable rental housing, which has significantly improved the tax base of Aberdeen in that section, which had basically no tax base at all.
Talking about the ones right behind Home Depot?
Yeah.
Well, if you were coming away from Home Depot, going back toward where Farhat and I live in Bully Rock.
Okay.
Yeah, things that contribute to loss of rental is Airbnbs, people who buy houses that were multifamily and converting them to single family. I even read something where in college towns, I don't know if it's State College is one of them, people are buying up houses just to rent them out on football weekends. So it gets crazy in some respects, that how housing, regular market
What
rate
a
housing.
house brings in State College for a football weekend,
10,
$1,000 for the weekend.
yeah, I bet. I bet. So,
We do have we have an ordinance that regulates the number of short-term rentals, and that licensing number is at 60. We have software to monitor that now, and I don't even think we've cracked 30 yet.
okay.
So we're staying pretty small on that. We haven't had this kind of corporate push you saw in other places where they're coming in and buying houses and
Yeah.
running them as part of like an Airbnb business. But we do have some safeguards in place to
Yeah,
help protect against
another
that.
trend you're starting to see in Texas anyway is subdivisions built for rental.
right.
And I don't know if that, I've asked that a couple of times, whether any of the subdivisions that have come our way, especially the newer ones, are geared towards that. But,
Given the Route 40 depth problem, you would think that Route 40 would be, a really good area for development.
oh, I agree. And as we think of things like how do you fix the Ontario Route 40 connection, there's some underutilized, either vacant or underutilized properties there that you straighten out the intersection and it's right by bus stops and, you create affordable housing too. So I think that's why we have to view these things comprehensively, because there's opportunities to fix many things in
The
one action.
reversion incentives on Union are really, taking those houses and reverting them back to residences is a
Yeah, it's a great idea.
good investment by the city, good public policy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks,
I just want to add one more thing on the subject of affordable housing is it often gets like a black eye, it's really, there's a lot of negative connotations associated with it for other reasons, but those people are, the human aspect of it, the humanization of housing is really critical, and they deserve to have affordable housing, but also housing that is at a certain, something that I haven't heard much about is the quality of life. And because the humanization of housing, they deserve a quality of life in a house that is conducive to a certain level of a quality of life, not just placed at a crossroads at a busy intersection with sirens and headlights and this and that, at a very active crossroads. They should also be afforded the opportunity to live in other areas that are more, say, cluster developments around forested, lake, water, etc., park space, open space. They should be afforded those opportunities equally as much as, some of the more, peripheral and often fringe territories of the city. So I think there's a few opportunities of that within the city. Not as much as the more the infill lots and corridors that exist, but those open space, green. You really should have you have a duty to look at those green open space developments with a quality of life for all. Yeah. Thank you all for your time.
Nicely stated.
Yeah, that was one of the attractive parts, Eric, of this development just south of Gashies Creek was the park is already there, if you notice, on top of the hill. It really, there's a lot to be said for that whole development concept.
And just to go off of that, the developers of that Blenheim Run actually put together a gazebo out there that the Harford County Link utilizes to move the people to get them to the places and services that they may need or desire to have a quality of life that works for them, a place that works for them, an area and have those services afforded to them at an affordable rate.
Thank you, Eric. Anybody else want to throw in anything, or are we about done? All right. We don't need to formally close the meeting because it's just a workshop, so I'm going to declare it
Closed.
closed.
Thanks, everybody.